Well, thank you very much for spending some of your day with me today. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. We're going to be waiting a couple minutes to begin until a few more people join us today. I've been on a couple other webinars here, and there's been occasion where there's some silence. I feel like maybe I can kind of put in a little bit of information during that silence as we wait for some people to join us. The presentation is going to be entertainment and education. It's going to have some elements of some tools and some strategies that I'd like for you to walk away with, as well as a bit of entertainment in the form of stories, because I believe stories are a powerful way to make sure that the information that I share with all of you is better understood and retained. We have audience members from ASW from all over the world, and many of you, your first language may or may not be English, and therefore I feel it's very, very important to try to use stories and metaphors to do our best to ensure that everyone is able to retain some of what we're sharing. So we'll wait about a couple of minutes, 2 minutes, and then we're going to jump right into the presentation. There is a handout which ASW and Katerina was able to send along. It will be, she would have emailed it to you, I believe, and it's also accessible on your ASW link. This handout essentially serves as the PowerPoint, because I felt not like using PowerPoint today. I felt like using more a traditional kind of participatory type of presentation. So I'll be using this form, which all of you have. If you don't happen to have it, if you don't worry about it, because I have this sheet, which I'll be referring to, plus some other pieces of paper that have the points that I want to get across, very simply put, so everyone will walk away with something. Absolutely. We'll begin in 1 minute. 1 minute. A couple things to think about as you're all there kind of waiting for this to begin. So the human brain, when someone begins to speak, I want you to imagine that the human brain starts running, it starts exercising. And the longer someone talks without a break, the more tired that the human brain becomes, and it's harder to pay attention. So I would challenge you all to every now and again kind of shift your position, kind of move your body, just change, not just sit there the entire time if you happen to be sitting as we go along, just so that kind of jogs your brain and just kind of shakes it up and helps you retain kind of what we're saying. The other thing is that sitting for a very long period of time is very challenging to the human body. And therefore, I would challenge you to, again, get up, or if you can, stand at your computer, because you're probably spending a long time every single day just looking at the computer on Zoom meetings or doing your work or whatever it might be. So I would challenge you to stand or perhaps move around. It's actually interesting. Stanford University did a study in terms of creativity, thinking, and they found that people who were actually walking or moving their body while they were thinking were actually 60% more creative than those who just sat down. And the idea behind it is just that your brain is much more active. There's more oxygen going to your brain while you're sitting down, while you're moving. So that's going to help you really process the information that's being shared to you, as well as it's going to keep your body very healthy as well. Especially, you'll start avoiding a lot of that back pain that kind of kicks in from prolonged bouts of sitting. The last thing I just want to share with you with regards to my professional background, all of that's in the handout. I don't want to be spending too much time talking to you about my background. Some of it will come up during the presentation, and the rest, if you want to learn more, again, it's in that handout. And again, lastly, for those of you who just jumped on, Katerina and ASW sent you this handout. This is something that you can reference if you have it on your computer, perhaps on your phone. This is what I'm going to be referring to off and on throughout the presentation instead of a traditional PowerPoint. So let us begin. We shall begin then. July 11th, 1976, Edmonton, Canada. That's when and where I was born. My mother is Japanese and my father is American, and both of them were immigrants to that country. And from the time that I was born, they both wanted to make sure that I learned as much as I possibly could about my respective cultures, about both of their respective cultures. So my Japanese mother, who was born in a small town just outside of Tokyo called Godoy, well, she enrolled me in Japanese language school, which I attended for one day out of every week for almost 12 years. And then my American father, well, he and I would take these long road trips down from Edmonton, Canada, where I was born, to the states of Washington and Oregon and into California to visit relatives. And all the while, he would tell me about the great men and women who helped shape and form this great country, about the great historical events that helped make the United States the great country that it is. Now, Edmonton, Canada, during the time that I was growing up, wasn't as culturally a diverse a place as it is today, meaning it was largely European, Eastern and Western. That means there were a lot of Germans and Irish and Dutch and English. And then sprinkled in amongst them were people from all sorts of other countries, which we called minorities because there were literally less of them. And then sprinkled in amongst them, there were people like myself, people who were either biracial or who were from two distinct cultural or ethnic backgrounds, essentially a minority of a minority. And although no one intentionally excluded me from their groups or excluded us from our groups, I just didn't quite feel like I belonged with either, whether it was the Asians or the North Americans, the Japanese or the Europeans, the Canadians. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I just didn't see the world the same as everybody else. I just couldn't because I had these two distinct perspectives that I had from growing up with those two cultures. And as a kid, as a child, this is very challenging because you really want to fit in. But I couldn't because I just didn't see the world the same as everybody else. However, as I started to get older, I started to realize that perhaps not quite seeing the world the same as everybody else wasn't actually a bad thing. It was actually a gift. You see, psychologists will tell you that each and every one of us, each and every one of you, well, you all look at the world through a unique set of lenses, like contact lenses or glasses. And those lenses are largely shaped by your cultural background, the environment you grew up in, the experiences that you've had, or perhaps your genetics. So some of you on this webinar are looking at the world through blue lenses, others yellow, others green, and others perhaps a kaleidoscope of different colors. I realized that I was looking at the world through two lenses at the same time, an Eastern and a Western, and a blue and a yellow. So as I started to try to figure out a little bit more about myself, about my background, knowing that I was looking at them through these two distinct lenses, I started to look at things that I admired in my respective cultures and things that I didn't admire. For example, in my Japanese culture, I admired their dedication to excellence and mastery, no matter what occupation or skill they chose to embrace. And then on my American side, well, I admire their staunch independence and patriotism that oozed to the veins of every single American that I had ever met. Now, because I don't want to make any enemies right now, I'm going to skip over the negative parts. But what I did also realize is that I also realized that each of my respective cultures had some unique historical lessons or learnings that they had learned over hundreds, if not thousands of years of experience, of trial and of error, of success and failure. And these experiences and these learnings were essentially wisdom that helped shape them into the great countries and nations that they had become. And then I realized, well, that's really interesting. Perhaps each of the cultures had wisdom and learning that perhaps the other side did not learn and could benefit from. And then I also realized, well, perhaps a lot of those learnings that were learned over the course of time could be applied to everyone, no matter where they are in modern times. And that's where we are today. And that's what I hope to share with you today. Today, I'm going to share with you a historical lesson learned by the samurai warriors of ancient Japan 400 years ago and apply it to modern times. And that lesson is to how to find health and happiness by using your principles as a compass to navigate through uncertain times. Now, I want you to imagine that you are a samurai warrior and you lived 400 years ago in ancient Japan. And many of you on this call are, of course, women. And ladies, there were female warriors in Japan at this period of time as well. They were called onna bugeisha. And they were just as ferocious, if not or even more ferocious than the men. So you are samurai warriors in Onnabugeisha, and you lived 400 years ago in ancient Japan. And you have two responsibilities, essentially. Your world revolves around two things. Number one is to become a master of your discipline, a master of your occupation, which is to be the best warrior that you could possibly be. And that means mastery of the skills of war, whether it's swordsmanship, horsemanship, archery. And so that was your day. From dawn to dusk, you would train to master those occupations or those skill sets. And the second thing that you had to do was dedicate absolute loyalty to your local lord, to your lord. And I'm not talking about a god, I'm talking about the warlord who you served. And that warlord owned the piece of land that you lived on and you protected. And that piece of land was called a fief. And Japan, in this period of its history, was full of these fiefs all over the place, all over the country, constantly fighting each other for supremacy. And so this was your life. It was training to become the best at your profession as you possibly could, to be masters of your skill, and to dedicate absolute loyalty to your Lord and be fighting. And this was your life as long as you could remember. This was your normal. But then imagine if all of a sudden, on a day, your whole world flipped upside down. And that's what happened to the samurai warriors of ancient Japan on October 21st, 1600. On October 21st, 1600, at the Battle of Sekigahara, the forces loyal to the warlord Tokugawa Ieyasu defeated his final rivals, the Toyotomi clan. And in so doing, he ushered in an era of peace and unified the country. So here you are, a samurai warrior on Onnabugeisha. Your whole world has been around training for your profession, for fighting and war. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in an environment where there is no more war. There is no more necessity for fighting. Right? So, because an important thing to realize is Japan at this period of its history was a largely isolated island nation with virtually no threat of foreign invasion. So all of a sudden your profession is no longer really applicable. It's like if you were a downhill skier and someone took away the snow, the mountain, and your skis. All of a sudden, you're potentially obsolete. It's kind of like what a lot of people have experienced now because of COVID and because of the lockdowns that are happening all over the world. Now, the samurai faced a choice. They could either adapt or they could not adapt. And they could not adapt and hope for things to go back the way they were for the old normal and fade into history. They could do that, but they didn't. What they chose to do is they adapted and they took on new professions. They became merchants and artisans and craftsmen and politicians. And in these new professions, they thrived. And part of the reason why they thrived is that into these new professions, they took a fundamental aspect of what made them some of the great warriors of all time, the great samurai. And that was their ethos, their principles, because those are what guided them through their lives. It was their ethos, and that ethos is called Bushido. And Bushido means the way of the warrior. And what Bushido is 7 universal humanistic principles that teach someone how to lead a good life. It's essentially a compass to help you get through life. It's like the modern day or the traditional way of GPS. It becomes what we gauge or the benchmark against which we gauge our decisions and our actions. And that is what I hope to share with you today. Today, I'm going to share with you the 7 principles of Bushido and apply it to our own challenges in modern times. And when I share with you these principles, I'm going to share with you the principles, some stories that help kind of really emphasize the point so that it's better understood, some modern day stories, and then give you some strategies on how you can apply it in your own lives. Therefore, we'll begin with the first principle of Bushido. It is called kenning. And what kenning means is to cultivate an indomitable spirit. Cultivate an indomitable spirit. So what does that mean? Well, I'll give you an example. In June of 2007, I found myself standing on the side of a road halfway up a mountain in southern France. I'd taken my racing bike and I'd thrown it to the ground in absolute anger and frustration. My right knee was in pain. It was the size of a grapefruit. It was so big. It was swollen. And what had brought me to this mountain in southern France was a goal that I had set out for myself about 10 years prior. And that goal was to complete a triathlon. However, as I stood on the side of that mountain, feeling sorry for myself, about to quit, I realized I was further from my goal than I'd ever been in my life. 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, 26.2-mile run. Brag for the rest of your life. Can you guess where those words come from? Some of you may have heard it before. There's some athletes on this call. I'll tell you. Those were the words that were written on the back of the race instructions given to the 15 participants of the inaugural Ironman triathlon back in 1977. Back in 1977, a commander in the United States Navy by the name of John Collins, he decided to have, he was having a debate, an argument with some other endurance athletes as to who the best athlete was. Was it the swimmers? Was it the bikers? Or were it the runners? And they couldn't come to a consensus. And so what they decided to do was to race for it. But they didn't have a race, so they had to create one. And so they looked to the island of Hawaii, where they were, to find inspiration for this race. So the 2.4-mile swim, well, that was inspired by the Waikiki Rough Water Open Water Swim, which is 2.4 miles in the open water in the ocean outside of Kona. And then the 112-mile bike, well, that was inspired by the Around the Oahu bike race. And then the 26.2-mile run, well, that was inspired by the Honolulu Marathon. And to put that into perspective, if you can think back to perhaps a high school or a university history class where you may have studied Greek history, and there was a section on the Peloponnesian War where the Greek Navy defeated the Persian Navy at the Battle of Marathon. Legend has it that after the victory, they sent one of their soldiers by the name of Philippides running from Marathon to the Athens, the distance of 26.2 miles, to tell the Athenians that the Greeks had won. Philippides runs the distance as fast as he can. He gets to the gates of Athens, knocks them open. He puts up his hands. He says, "We won." You remember what happened to him? Right. He died. He died of exhaustion. And I share that with you just to put into perspective how challenging all of this is. And all of it needs to be completed between 16 to 18 hours because the race is so popular all over the world that people are constantly competing in these events. And just depending on the difficulty of the race or where you are, the time is a little bit different. Now, every year, the best of the best, they come back to Hawaii where the race first originated, and they compete in what's called the Ironman World Championships. So I want to take you back to Ironman World Championships 1988. And there are two women with tremendous kenning. One by the name of Cyan Welch, and the second by the name of Wendy Ingram. And these two women have tremendous kenning, tremendous indomitable will. And their goal this particular year is to become the top female Ironman athletes of that particular year. So it's a beautiful sunny Hawaii day, and the two women jump into the water and they swim 2.4 miles in that cold Hawaii water. They get out of the water, they jump on their bikes, and they're starting to ride 112 miles. They're moving further and further and further to the front of the pack. They get off their bicycles, strap on the laces, and they begin to run the third leg of this three-leg race. Things are going amazing. They're moving closer and closer to the front. They're about to win. They're about to achieve their objective. But then all of a sudden, the unexpected happens. 100 meters from the finish line. Right now, there are spectators lining the side of the road. 100 meters from the finish line. Cyan Welch, who's just slightly in front of her friend Wendy, her beautiful stride begins to fall apart. What was once a beautiful stride turns into a walk, turns into a stumble. Her vision begins to blur, her upper body tilts to the side, and then she collapses to the ground. And then Wendy Ingram, as if she was a conjoined twin, literally at the exact same spot, the same thing happened to her. Can you guess what happened to her? They didn't die. That's often what people guess. No. What happened to them is there's a term in endurance sports called bonked. And what bonking is when the human body runs out of all physical energy, the body shuts down so that you don't die. They had pushed themselves to the limit, physically and mentally, and their body just shut down. They couldn't go any further. So imagine that you're a spectator and you're lying on the side of the road and you see this. You have two choices. You can help them or just hope something miraculous happens and they move on. Tense moments pass. And then Wendy Ingram, devoid of any physical energy, having just completely exhausted all her energy, digging down into a well of energy that exists in people who have tremendous kending, she gets onto all fours and she begins to crawl, left hand, right knee, right hand, left knee, towards the finish line. And then Cyan Welch, possessing equally as much kending, she too gets on all fours and she too begins to crawl towards the finish line. And the two women crawl those 100 meters and into Ironman history. Now, as I stood on that mountain in southern France, feeling sorry for myself, about to quit, my mind turned to people like Cyan and Wendy, whose inspiration were part of the reason I was on the mountain in the first place. So I strapped on my laces, got back on my bike, went up the rest of the hill and down the other side. And then I ran, I'll be honest, I jogged the 26.2 miles. And in 15 hours and 31 minutes, pretty much dead last, my kending was a little bit stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, the example that people like Cyan and Wendy show us is the power of kending, the power of cultivating an indomitable spirit. It gives us access to a reserve of energy that exists in everyone. If you have your goal in your mind's eyes, if you set ambitious goals, because it can push you forward, even at times when you lack physical energy, when your mind is exhausted, when you're physically tired because of all the craziness that is happening around us. We dig down and we access our kending, our indomitable spirit, our energy that exists there to move forward. And we cultivate it. We make more of it by continuing to create goals for ourselves that we pursue. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world and people often can't see over the horizon, see where things are going to go. Is there going to be a vaccine? Is there going to be no vaccine? Are things going to open up? When is there going to be certainty? We don't know. And oftentimes people kind of shut down. But what Cyan and Wendy show us is the power of setting goals. If we set goals, write them down, no matter how small they are, and we knock them down, our kending gets a little bit stronger, and indomitable will gets a little bit stronger. So on those days where we lack physical energy, the days we lack mental energy, we can tap into that well of energy that exists for those of us who cultivate an indomitable spirit. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is kending. The second principle of Bushido is called shinnen. And what shinnen means is to cultivate a strong sense of self, a strong sense of self. Now, a hero is someone who inspires us to become a better version of ourselves. They could be someone we've never met before. They could be a family member, a friend. They could be a teacher. They could be a mentor. But whoever they are, they inspire us to be better. We may have never ever met them before. I want you to take a moment and think about someone in your life. Maybe you don't call them a hero, but who's inspired you to become better. It's amazing how just thinking about our heroes can just change how we feel, give us a little bit more motivation to push forward. That's the power of heroes. I too have a hero, and she is a swimmer. In the late 1990s, I was a collegiate athlete at Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. I swam and I played water polo. And I very distinctly remember that right above my dormitory room door, right above the door to where I was living, I had a giant poster of my hero. And I put it there so anytime I entered and exited my room, I would look up and see their picture and be inspired to become the best athlete and the best student I could be that particular day. After my 4-year athletic career ended and I moved to Toronto to become a professional water polo coach, well, I continue to use her story to now inspire my athletes to become the best athletes and students that they could be. And then after those 4 years ended and I moved to Chicago, I continued to use her story now to inspire my clients because I'd started a fitness business here to become the best version of themselves. Dara Grace Torres was born in Beverly Hills, California in 1967 to Ed and Mary Lou. And I can pretty much guarantee you that no one at the time of her birth would have ever suspected that that little girl would someday grow up to become one of the world's greatest Olympic athletes. In 1984, at the Los Angeles Olympic Games, Dara, and she was 16 years old at those games, Dara and her teammates on the 4x100 meter freestyle relay team brought home gold for the United States. And that accomplishment inspired her to dedicate herself to her profession and to mastery of the skills of that profession. That profession was sport swimming, and the skill was freestyle swimming. And that dedication, so she spent hundreds and thousands of hours in the pool training mile after mile after mile. And that dedication to mastery of her skills, mastery of her profession, paid off. And she qualified for 4 more Olympic Games, the most recent being in Beijing, China in 2008. So I want you to take a moment and just kind of guess how old she was in Beijing, China in 2008. She was born in 1967. She was 41 years old. 41 years old. To put that into perspective, the average age for a female swimmer in the Olympic Games is 21, half her age. So when she qualified, there were so many critics that came out and said, well, she's too old. She should step aside and let someone younger take her place. But Dara Shinen was too strong. She had done the work. She had a strong sense of self, so she ignored the critics. Well, then the critics did, as critics do, and they turned their attention to something else. They said, well, she's not going to win a single medal then. Well, they were right. Dara didn't win a single medal at those games. In fact, she won 4 more medals at those games, bringing to a lifetime total of 11. But on top of the medals, she did 2 incredible things, even more incredible than the medals. Number 1, she silenced the critics. And number 2, she inspired the over 40 crowd the world over that even after the age of 40, the human body has the capacity to compete at the highest of levels. Ladies and gentlemen, what Dara shows us is the power that comes from having a strong sense of self. And a strong sense of self just doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's cultivated and it's built. And you can build it by becoming a master of your profession and become a master of your skills. With COVID and the lockdowns, many people have found that perhaps their professions have disappeared, the skills have disappeared. All of a sudden they find themselves with a loss of identity or perhaps a loss of confidence. You can regain the confidence, or you can build on your current level by identifying the professions that you'll need, identifying the skills that perhaps you currently have and you can continue to hone, or identify new skills that you will be needed in the coming years and decades post-COVID, and then take steps to develop those skills by taking online courses at universities, whether they're on MOOCs or universities, or perhaps on online platforms like Udemy, or hiring a coach, whatever they might be. It's by honing your skills that you will develop the confidence to essentially navigate any uncertainty, any challenges that occur in life. So I challenge you to identify one skill that you currently have that you want to enhance and identify some courses to enhance it. Or number two, identify a skill that you're going to need in the future, whether it's technology related or communication related, and then take steps to enhance and learn that as well. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the second principle of Bushido. The third principle of Bushido is called Shincho. Shincho. And what Shincho means is good judgment. Is good judgment. In the winter of 2009, I was sitting on my couch. It was wintertime here in Chicago. And for those of you who live in colder climates or parts of the world where are colder climates, you know how difficult mentally winter can become on the soul sometimes. So it was wintertime here in Chicago, and the phone rang. And on the other end of the line was the owner of a baseball academy in the Dominican Republic. And he wanted to know if I would come down there to the Dominican Republic and work with his athletes to help prepare them for Major League Baseball's international draft. It was wintertime here in Chicago. It's a very easy answer. Yes, I'm coming. Of course I'll come. And so began a 2-year period of my life where I would travel down to the Dominican Republic for 1 week out of every 4 to work with their athletes to help prepare them for Major League Baseball's international draft. And it is here where I met a young man named Bienvenido Ramirez. He was 15 years old. He was about 6'7" tall. He was skinny, darker in complexion. He possessed the gaze of someone who's seen a lot of hardship in a very short period of life. He also had this tremendous ability to take a baseball with his left arm and throw it over 90 miles an hour over and over and over again, which in baseball is a tremendously valuable skill. But what makes Bienvenido's story so interesting is that his should never have been a story in the first place. You see, Bienvenido is illiterate, and Bienvenido was born poor. And the Dominican Republic is one of those countries in the world where the social class into which you are born largely dictates the social class into which you'll die. That means if you're born poor, you're more than likely going to die poor. The opportunity to change your circumstances that many of us have doesn't exist for most poor young Dominicans. I want you to visualize Bienvenido's childhood home. It's basically 4 walls, dirt floor, corrugated metal roof, bathroom on the outside, no privacy. Both of Bienvenido's parents are subsistence livers, meaning that their day-to-day life is just survival. And Bienvenido, being the prodigal son or being the good son, he chose to help his parents. So he chose survival over education. But he had a dream, and that dream was to become a pelotero profesional, a professional baseball player. But although the probability of that actually happening is so very low, it is one of the few avenues available to a poor young Dominican to change his circumstances and that of his families. So it was a beautiful sunny Dominican day, and Bienvenido was playing pickup baseball in a dirt field just outside of Santiago. Santiago is the 2nd largest city in the Dominican Republic. And a car pulls out, and out of the car steps a gentleman by the name of Pineda. And Pineda is a scout for our academy. And his role is to go to these baseball diamonds or baseball games that are all over the island of the Dominican Republic and just look for players who have some talent and some ability. And when he saw Bienvenido, he was so amazed by his ability that he grabbed Bienvenido and brought him to our academy. And when he came to our academy, he was thrown right into the mix. He was thrown right into training. And the training at the academy is really difficult. It's 6 to 8 hours of physical, mental, spiritual, emotional training, 6 days a week, day after day, week after week, year after year, until you sign with a professional organization, or as in most cases, the powers that be say, unfortunately, you're not going to make it. and you're sent home having lost the only opportunity probably in your whole life that you'll have to change your circumstances, your families, and potentially generations to come. Now at the academy, initially Bienvenido did really, really well. He thrived. He loved the structure, the training. It really helped him a lot. But after about 5 months, we started to notice Bienvenido's body start to break down. He was always tired. His mind, he had a difficult time focusing. He was always sleeping. He didn't have energy anymore. He didn't have the will to train anymore. And perhaps many of you are feeling some of the same symptoms, having been on lockdown, having been kind of held back from your everyday life because of COVID and the lockdowns. So his body was really shutting down. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that Bienvenido's body hadn't been prepared for the training. Because he was born poor, health wasn't very important to him, really, in terms of diet, exercise, sleep, stress management. That wasn't really part of his life. Survival was part of his life. So his body wasn't physically strong enough. And so it started to break down. So we as coaches did what we could. We gave him a better program. We brought in doctors and therapists and nutritionists to work with him. And a lot of it helped. However, there's a saying here in the West that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. In other words, you can tell somebody what to do, show them the way, but you can't make them do it. And perhaps that's a universal idea and concept. You see, every single day Bienvenido woke up, he faced a choice. He could exhibit good shincho, good judgment, and make decisions and take actions that moved him towards his goal. Whether it was eating the right foods to strengthen his body, whether it's to exercise despite not having the initiative to strengthen his body, whether to get enough sleep and reduce the amount of stress. He had that choice. Or he could exhibit poor shincho, bad judgment, and make decisions that moved him further and further and further away from his goals of becoming a professional baseball player. Now, I'm happy to say that Bienvenido eventually was connected with a professional organization, and he was able to change his life to some degree because he exhibited good shincho. Now, all of you are probably not aspiring to be professional baseball players, but you all, when you wake up every morning, face the exact same choice that Bienvenido does. And that choice is, do you exhibit good shincho? Make choices that move you towards your goals, your dreams, your ambitions. Move you towards getting through a post-COVID life better than you went into this whole pandemic? Or do you make choices that just take you down further, 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 further away from your goals and beat you up? Ladies and gentlemen, the summer I knew that in times of great change and uncertainty, it was so crucial to always remember to exhibit good judgment, to make good choices. But oftentimes when we're not thinking about our goals, we're not thinking about our principles, our values, or what's important to us, if it's not in our mind's eye, we forget to make good judgment. So I challenge you all to write out your goals or the things that you want on a piece of paper and put them up on a wall so that every day you look at them. And when you see them, you're more apt to make good choices and good judgment, and you'll move further, closer and closer to your goals and ambitions and dreams. That, ladies and gentlemen, is shincho. So if you haven't stood up for a moment, I would challenge you all to get up, just kind of move your body a little bit. You've been sitting there for maybe about 30, 35 minutes. Just move around a little bit. And if you want, just watch the presentation, if you're not listening to it, while standing for a little bit, so you don't just get stuck the entire time. That is good shincho. And it's a nice segue for the next principle, which is called sessei. Sessei means to seek balance in your life. To seek balance in your life. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I used to belong to a business organization called Vistage International. And what Vistage is an international peer advisory group where professionals, business owners from different industries, different companies get together and just help each other out. And usually about 95% of the meeting revolves around problem solving around business, but usually 5% of the meeting involves bringing in a guest speaker to give us a presentation on some topic that's of interest. Usually it's law, business, finance, whatever it might be. But every holiday season, we invite generally a health speaker to talk to us about health, because we know health is very important for business and for people. And I remember our group invited this one Christmas a Canadian doctor to give us a presentation on how mental stress affected us physically, how mental stress manifested itself physically. Mental stress is something that everybody is kind of dealing with today, from the news, from what's going on in the world with all the uncertainty. And so I remember it was around 9:30 in the morning on a Friday morning. We were on the 3rd floor of what's called the Hancock Building in Chicago. It's one of the tallest buildings here. And the staff there had taken out all the regular tables and replaced them with 3 long conference room tables, which they had placed in a horseshoe formation. Many of you probably know that from business conference that you've been to or meeting rooms that you've had. And we had this horseshoe formation of tables, and the 12 members of my group sat around the side, outside of it, just chatting, and it allowed the speaker to come walk down the middle. It was around 9:30, we're there, and the back doors open, and in walks the speaker. And he's about 65 years old. He's got salt and pepper dark hair, meaning that it's black and white type hair. He looks like a doctor. He's got a white doctor's jacket. He's got a black doctor's bag, and he just walks in and starts his presentation. About a third of the way into the presentation, the doctor goes to the side of the room and grabs a white plastic chair and puts it in the center of the room, in the center of that horseshoe formation. He opens up his black doctor's bag, and out of it, he takes a black blood pressure monitor, and he puts it next to it. He then looks to the 12 members of my group, and he goes, "I need a volunteer." No one volunteered. But within 60 seconds, I found myself sitting in that white plastic chair with a black blood pressure monitor cuff strapped to my arm. I had been what's called voluntold. And voluntold is when you're told that you are the volunteer. The good doctor then proceeded to take my blood pressure, and I was very happy to know that it was very good. And he said, for this little experiment, I had the difficult role. All I had to do was just sit there and be very calm, expressionless, much like many of us do when we have a lot of stressful things going on around us. We try to just keep a very stoic and powerful face. That was my role. He then looked at the other members of my group and told them that they have the easy role. For the next 60 seconds, he told them that they had to say everything mean to me that they could possibly think about. Anything goes. He said, "Ready, go." For 60 seconds, my peer group, my friends, my colleagues turned into school bullies. They said things like, "John, you bring no value to the group. You're so stupid. Your business sucks." They went personal. "You smell, you stink." All sorts of horrible things for 60 seconds. My face remained zen, much like all of us do. After 60 seconds, the good doctor says, "Stop." Stop. He says it 3 times. Those animals took forever to stop. After those 60 seconds, he retook my blood pressure, and what do you think had happened? Right? It went up very, very high. It shot through the roof. My blood pressure went through the roof, but I had not physically moved. I was just sitting in that chair. And what had happened was the mental stress of everybody saying all these negative things about me had manifested itself physically in my body. And that's happening to all of you every single day when you're reading the negative stuff in the news, when you're trying to deal with all the stress in life, when you have toxic people just bringing you down. Now, the human body is designed to deal with stress, right? But it's designed to deal with acute stress. And what acute stress is, there's a stress that happens, blip, and then your body's stress response brings it back down. Then another stress blip, stress response brings it back down. And that's why stress is fine, generally, when it's acute. But when stress is just constantly elevated all the time, negative stuff, just manifesting itself on us, that's when we get all the negative health ailments like high blood pressure and hypertension. So it's so important that we reduce the stressors that are on our body. And there's 3 ways you can do this. Number 1 is move. Number 2 is mitigate. And number 3 is manage. Move is very straightforward. If you want to reduce your stress, Move your physical body, exercise, because what that does is it flushes the cortisol out of your body and it forces the adrenaline out of your body, so your body relaxes. The second thing you do is you mitigate the stress, right? So for example, if you get stressed staying in a particular room in your house all the time, then you mitigate it by moving around, to moving your laptop and working from other rooms. That's a perfect example. Another format of stress management is that you manage the stress. And this is probably the most important, because one of the biggest sources of stress that exists are negative people, right? People cause us the most amount of stress. So stop responding to them via email or phone, or reduce the amount of stress that you're getting from them. Another very powerful way to manage stress is to reduce the amount of news that you watch on an everyday basis. Instead of looking at it every single day, perhaps look at it at the end of the week. Generally, the news doesn't change at all during a week on a day-to-day basis, but at the end of the week, you're bound to get a more insightful perspective. But these are all just ways to kind of reduce stress. But the only reason I use stress as an example is it's a very easy example to illustrate what happens to your body when you're out of balance. But stress isn't the only thing that causes you to be out of balance. Things like, are you giving more love than you're receiving? Are you perhaps working more than you're spending time with your loved ones? There are all these areas where we can be out of balance, and when we are out of balance, the body knows. We feel it. And if we don't do something about it, the body will naturally bring us back into balance. And when it takes control, when nature takes control, the ride isn't very soft. So I challenge you to identify different areas in your life where you may be out of balance, and then take steps to get back into balance. A perfectly easy example is movement. We spend about 80% of our day just sitting in a chair, looking at Zoom and working, right? Our body is out of balance from the perspective of movement versus lack of movement. The body was meant to do both. It was meant to sit and move, but we're more towards the sitting. And that's causing havoc on your body, and it builds up over time. So if you find yourself sitting too much, then practice standing and working, going for walks, building it into your day, make it a routine. That's one way to return balance to your body. That, ladies and gentlemen, is sessay. The next principle is called seigi. Seigi. And what seigi means is to seek justice, to be just, to do what is right. Now, from the time that I was a young boy, my father always told me that it was important to know what was going on in the world outside of my neighborhood, outside of my city, outside of my country, because he always knew that what would happen over there would eventually affect me over here in where I lived. And to that effect, he would always give me magazines or newspaper clippings from The Economist or The Walrus or Maclean magazines that talked about what was going on in the world, and he encouraged me to read them. When I went off to college, a lot of my friends received care packages from their families. I received little parcels that contained the same magazines, the same newspaper clippings, with Post-it notes on it saying, you should read this, you should read this, you should read this. And then after university, and I started my own business and I went on my own, well, I continued the habit that my father had taught me, and I continued now to buy my own subscription. And what I've learned and what I've been noticing over time, and you've probably noticed it as well, that on every single continent in the world, and I would probably argue that the penguins in Antarctica would fall into this category as well. On every single continent, there are people, for reasons such as social, political, or economic unrest, feel that there's some grave injustice that is happening, and they cannot sit idly by, so they want their voice to be heard, and so they take action. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the fifth principle of Bushido Seigi, is to take action on what you believe is right, to stand up for what you believe in. Far too often in life, we see injustices happen and we do nothing about it, and that ultimately eats at the soul of good people. And the samurai knew that an important value to possess was this notion of always standing up and speaking on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves, and for the support of the beliefs that you believe in on what justice is. So I challenge you to look for organizations that you can join that perhaps will help you make your voice heard. I challenge you to get up and speak, or to talk to people who are doing things that are not right or not just. And instead of being quiet, stand up. Because when you do so, your soul will become stronger. Your seigi becomes just a little bit stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the 5th principle of Bushido. The 6th principle of Bushido is called Jizen. And Jizen means benevolence. Benevolence. To be good, to be kind. So a little while ago, probably it was about 1.5 years ago, I was at a copy center making the handouts that I gave all of you earlier. I was making, I was making this handout. And I got into a conversation with the person who worked at the copy center. His name was Gabriel. And he asked me what the handouts were for. And I said they were for a educational, motivational type presentation I was giving. And he said, oh, I should be a motivational speaker. And I said, oh, that's interesting, Gabriel. Why would you want to do that? And he said that in his day-to-day life, he finds himself continuously counseling young men and women who don't have anyone to look up to, who may not have any mentors on any heroes. You see, as Gabriel lives in a part of Chicago that I certainly don't go to, and it's a certain part of Chicago that's very, very rough, very, very violent, it's a very hard place to live and grow up. And he was telling me, Gabriel was telling me that his whole life revolved around just staying out of jail, doing what was right. And he felt that now that he was older and he was working at a copy center and he was able to stay out of jail, that he was successful. And now all he wanted to do was to ensure that his son made the same choices and was able to avoid the same negative lifestyle. And he also found that in his neighborhood, there were a lot of young boys and young girls who had nobody to teach them how to live well. And he wanted to share it with them. Now, I was very inspired by what Gabriel said, because I realized that what Gabriel showed me epitomized this principle. It was of Jizen, sorry, this principle, Jizen. It epitomized Jizen, because what being benevolent is helping those who are less fortunate than you. And oftentimes when we think about that, we often think about giving people money or things, but oftentimes it's about giving people information, experience, wisdom. And the wisdom comes from experience they may not have access to, they may not know. And that becomes just as powerful, if not more powerful, than giving people money or things, because it can change how people think, and that can change how people behave and act. So the samurai knew that it was so important in order to lead a good life, to be benevolent, to help those who may not have the same experiences, the same opportunities, or same things as you do. So I challenge you all to identify perhaps young men and young women in your lives. Maybe they're your niece, your nephew, people, the children of people that you know, or perhaps you're a teacher, or whoever it might be. And instead of thinking about giving them material things, give them knowledge, give them wisdom, give them learnings from your experience. And in so doing, you will greatly enhance their lives, but also enhance your own. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Jizen. I'd like to leave you with the last principle of Bushido. And this is arguably the most important. And this one is called Kibo. And Kibo means hope. During the Second World War, both of my grandparents were involved. On one side of the Pacific in Japan, my grandfather, Hiroshi, at the beginning of the war, well, he was flying supply missions all around the islands of the South Pacific to ensure that the forces of the Imperial Army of Japan had enough supplies. Then towards the end of the war, as Japan started to lose, and he had to come back to the island, he ended up training kamikaze pilots, young kamikaze pilots, how to fly a one-way mission to defend the island against the encroaching Japanese fleet, the encroaching American fleet. And then on the other side of the Pacific, my grandfather Robert, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, bringing the United States into the war, he, like many young, brave men and women of his generation, joined the army. He joined the 82nd Airborne. He fought in Africa and he fought in Europe. And fortunately, both of them survived the war, though many of their friends did not. And everything that and they never really talked about it. Everything I learned through other people, through family members. At the end of the war, my grandfather Hiroshi married his sweetheart Hanumi, and they had 4 children. And he started his own tofu business and a couple other businesses. And then after the war, my grandfather Robert, well, he flew back to the United States after stopping in England and picking up his war bride Brenda. He landed in Los Angeles and started his own company, and he had 2 children. 20 years later, roughly, one of Hiroshi's children, Akiko, flew over from Japan to go to UCLA, the university here. And then one of Robert's sons, Dudley, also went to UCLA. They met, fell in love, got married, and then moved up to Canada, to Edmonton, and had me. A couple years later, after having me, my grandfather Hiroshi flew over from Japan, and my grandfather Robert drove up from California. And they met for the very first time in the backyard of my childhood home. And although I was too young to remember it, I heard from those who were there, my parents, I can imagine that these people, these 2 men who were enemies at one point, who lived through such tremendous hardship of times, who did not speak the same language, when they both looked at their children and their children's children, I can imagine they were overcome with a tremendous sense of kibol, a strong sense of hope in the future, a hope that the future for these children and the children's children will be so much better than the world that they had just gone through. And the samurai knew that a profound principle to always remember, always to possess and cultivate is hope. It's to remember that human history is long and very, very long. And over that time, there's been ebbs and flows, right? But it always returns to balance. And although what we're going through right now may be a rough patch, we have to know that eventually it will get better again, and have a strong kibo, a hope that this too shall pass, and we'll be able to thrive and move forward beyond. As I come to a close, I leave you with this last little thought. Right before COVID happened, I was at a bookstore, a now defunct bookstore in Chicago, and I was looking through some books on the martial arts, and I came across this book called Yokojun. And Yokojun was written by a samurai physician named Kaibara Ekiken. And what Kaibara Ekiken, he wrote it about 20 years after the Battle of Sekigahara. And the reason why he wrote it is that he felt that the samurai were getting a little soft in their new occupations. They weren't as physically active as they were when they were warriors, now that they're essentially merchants and politicians and artisans and craftsmen. They weren't as active. So he decided to write a book, and the book is about 250 pages of advice. But I'm going to sum it up into four general ideas. Eat right, get plenty of movement, sleep, reduce your stress. Sounds pretty familiar, right? Yeah, of course it is. It's the same information that modern day health experts tell us to do. And the reason why I share that with you is just to remind us that if we keep our eyes and ears open to the past, as history often has a tendency to repeat itself, we can learn from the experience and the wisdom of those who've come before us. So I challenge you to perhaps create your own list of principles, your own ethos. Maybe components of it are from Bushido, others are from your religion or from wherever they may be. Write them down, put them up on your wall, and look at them every single day. And when you do that, that act of writing it down and looking at it will help you adapt, thrive, and find happiness and health in our uncertain times. Thank you. So if anybody has any questions, that's the end of the presentation. I hope there was a few things that you were able to take away. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in there. I also give presentations. If you're interested in having me with your organization or your team, please feel free to contact me. And I also teach how to give presentations. I learned these skills just out of necessity. I'm an introvert and I did this for work, and now I enjoy helping others. So thank you again for investing your most precious asset, your time, being here with me today. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. It's all in the handout that was sent to you. My background's there. Any questions, please feel free to ask, please. There's a question here from Massimo Zilio at the end. He says, at the end, could you please tell us something about the Roni, and thank you in advance. My understanding of the Roni is not elaborate. All I do know is that generally when a samurai had a warlord that he essentially reported to, if that warlord was to pass away, the samurai would then become masterless. And that's what Ronin is. Ronin is essentially a masterless samurai. Now, I don't want to talk about something I don't know too much about, but that's what I can tell you about that. Let's see. Look at the question. There's a question here from Pamela Struley. What do you mean about feeling an introvert? What I mean is that I'm not someone who really enjoys attention. I'm not someone who naturally looks for a large group. There's an introvert and extrovert, people who are a little bit more reserved, and others who are more extroverted, who like being out in groups and in public. And the skills that I demonstrated today in my presentation, I had to learn them all. This is my shinran. This is what I cultivated, because I realized that these were skills that would help me in business and in life, but also help me share what I wanted to share with others to help them. But being an introvert, meaning that I would, I'd rather kind of not present sometimes, but I'll do it because of by choice. That's kind of what I mean. Thank you very much for all of your kind presentations. I was hoping to definitely make it, kind comments. I was definitely trying to make it international and universal in terms of its message. I actually made this presentation back in 2014, and I first put it out in front of my first group. It was about 250 people. And I had no idea when I made it back then that it would actually be so applicable today, about today's times, because it's all about uncertainty. It's all about how to navigate through uncertain times. I'm a big believer in, it goes back to balance, right? Ebbs and flows. And yeah, it's kind of fitting for the now. Thank you very much for everyone being here. Let's see if there's any more questions. No? Excellent. So everyone has this, I hope you have, where is it? Oh, here. This is something that you can all use. It is the principles. It's in that handout. Please feel free to share it with your loved ones, maybe the young people in your life. I feel these days there aren't necessarily a lot of good influences out there. A lot of things are negative. Something like this becomes a very powerful guide to have. You don't have to believe in Bushido, but the principles are universal. I would welcome the opportunity to connect with everybody on through ASW. Please connect with me, and I'll reach out to everybody on the chat as best I can. Thank you again. Right. Alessandra says, thank you so much. Can we watch it again somewhere? Yes, absolutely. ASW will put it up on YouTube. It'll be on the ASW site. There are a lot of amazing presentations that are up there. This is just one of them. Ladies, again, I apologize. I kept saying samurai, but please remember I was referring to the Onnabu geisha as well. They are, as we know, women are very ferocious and very, very important. So yes, thank you. Well, that's the end of the presentation. That's the end of the presentation. Unless Anybody has any questions? I'll stick around. It's just very kind of you for all the nice words that you have here. I'm glad. I'm glad. So the product that I invented, I thought I'd share this, is actually a device that helps people stay a little bit more active while they're at their desk, because sitting is really, really bad for you. Because I used to also have a fitness business. I was in the personal training business. And so we crowdfunded a product, brought it to market. And it just all stems from the idea that the human body was not meant to sit so much. It's out of balance. That's why your back hurts. That's why your neck hurts. It's because you're sitting like this all the time. And it's so important to break up how you sit. I would recommend you can either perch, where you're just kind of like sitting on the edge of a chair, stand up, kind of move your body. Because when you move and you speak, or you move, let's say you're on Zoom, when you're standing, it allows you to use your hand gestures a little bit more, so you come across more powerfully. So that's an important thing. I imagine every country in the world, every culture in the world has something very similar to Bushido. This is just one. Oh, for those of you who, this is another, maybe an interesting, for those of you who are in ethnic, intercultural, interracial relationships and have children, this might give you kind of a glimpse on how they see the world to a degree, because they look at it through two lenses at the same time. So it's kind of a very different perspective than just looking at it from one. Both are great, of course, but it's just looking at it through two at the same time. It might give you a little bit more understanding of your kids. So there's a question: what helped you cultivate a strong sense of self and indomitable spirit? You mentioned being introverted and having to learn more to extroversion. Well, to be honest, when my self-confidence was pretty low when I was a younger person, and I learned the martial arts to develop my confidence. That's a huge component of it, because when you learn to defend yourself, although probably you never have to, it just becomes a transformational way to live through life. So martial arts are very, very important, because again, it gets rid of the physical violence, the perceived threat of physical violence, which is part of confidence. And then the ability to communicate with anyone at any time, to be able to present. It was important to me, because in my work, I had to present, I had to communicate, but I was very bad at it. I was hiding, I wasted people's time, I read PowerPoint all the time. So I went to Toastmasters, and then I hired a coach, I went to improv, and I learned all this. And I essentially really, over 15 years, to cultivate myself into someone who can communicate much better. And it's been one of the greatest liberators for me ever. And a lot of it also had to do with changing my perception as well. I'll give you an example. I used to hate networking. Networking was terrible. I hated having superficial conversations with everybody. It was very difficult. It was hard enough to go up and introduce myself to everybody, right? And start conversations that I knew that were probably not going to go anywhere. But then I changed my perception of it. And I changed networking to, I imagine that in the mind of every single person that I meet, there's a piece of information that could change my life. Maybe it's a piece of wisdom, maybe it's a nugget, it's a business connection, whatever it might be. And so if I just ask them enough questions, then I might be able to find that information. It'll have been worth my time. They'll think I'm a great conversationalist, and I walk away with something. So that small mental change, it was nothing else, a mental change, changed how I looked at it, and networking became a joy. I became like an adventurer, and every place I would go, I'm just going to ask questions. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to questions. I don't actually have to talk to myself. That was a powerful transformational idea. So I think so much of it happens in here. Another powerful tool that I found was when you're speaking, when you're presenting. Everybody generally has to present in front of a group of people, right? In front of businesses and at weddings, whatever it might be. And for a lot of people, it's very anxiety. It creates anxiety. And so what I would challenge you again is to change it in here. You change it in here by starting to think it has nothing to do about you. Oftentimes we think, all right, everyone everyone's going to be afraid. Everyone's going to judge me. They're going to think I'm stupid, I'm silly, I'm saying the wrong things. But that is the wrong way to look at it. If you look at it like you're there for everybody else, and your objective is to use every tool that you have in your quiver, in your toolkit to get your message across, and it's all about them, it takes the pressure off. You relax because you look at it as now I'm trying to help them versus, oh my gosh, are they going to judge me? And again, it's a mental change, but then it makes it so much easier. So much easier. Alessandra had a question. Do you plan to do a class to go deeper about all these topics? No, I don't actually have a class to do it. I feel that this is just one philosophy, and there's so many out there. And I think people should identify and create their own. I created my own as well to some degree. I call it Indomitable. Indomitable means the way. It's like taking the word life in Japanese and adding the word do. Do means the way, the path, the journey in Chinese and Japanese, or do tao. So it's the way of life. And it's just my own philosophy that helps me get through things. Marcus says, where would you place goal setting in the Bushido code and also finding the right goals? I would put goal setting up in Kenning, to cultivate an indomitable spirit, right? Indomitable spirit is developed by overcoming challenges that we face, obstacles that we face. And if we set ambitious goals, or, ambitious is relevant to the individual. If we set ambitious goals and we knock them down, our Kenning gets a little bit stronger. When you need to identify what goals are the right goals, I'm going to be very straightforward with you. I'm very much of the mindset, and so let me take a step back. My philosophy is I blend Eastern wisdom, physical integrity, and entrepreneurial practicality to come up with advice and tips and thinking. And so when someone says, what is the right goal that one should have, I lean towards the Eastern kind of philosophy, and I would tell a person that they actually have to spend time introspecting, identifying who they are, figuring out who they are. And you go to websites like 16 Personalities to find out a little bit more about you. Send out questionnaires to your friends, your closest friends and family, and ask them how they perceive you, right? How do you come across to them? And there's so many different tests out there. If you feel free to email me and I can send you, I've done them all, these links to these tests, but they help identify who you are. Once you identify who you are, then you're much better able to set goals. I'll give you an example. I should never have become really an entrepreneur. I should never have become, I've worked with certain people. I should never have done certain things because that's not who I am. That's not who my personality type is. It was something that I thought I needed to be, a person that I needed to be because society said that that's who I needed to be. And so there was a huge disconnect and there was a problem. It was nobody's fault but my own. I was playing pretend, really. I was a pretend business person. I was a pretend entrepreneur. I was a pretend crowdfunder. I was doing the work, but it was painful. It was painful because it didn't align to who I was. And so I had to figure out who I was. I had to take a step back, figure out who I was to move forward. There was a point in a previous endeavor where it got so bad that I started to drink, not super heavily, but I'm not a person who drinks. And I found myself on the beach with wine and alcohol in midday. I was just in so much pain because I was trying to pretend I was trying to be the person that I wasn't. There's this Japanese philosophy called ikigai, and it's basically who you are. And the ikigai is a blend of what you're passionate about, what the world will pay you, what skills you actually have, and there's a fourth one I don't remember at the moment. But basically, it's a Venn diagram, and all four intersect, and that helps you identify what you need to do. It's not of that philosophy of do what you're passionate about. I don't necessarily believe that. I think it's an ideal, but I think there's a better way to do it, and I think it's ikigai. It's where your passions meet your skills, meets what the world needs, meets what the world will pay you for. That's it. That's the fourth one. That's Ikigai. So I challenge you to look up Ikigai if you're looking for those questions. Yeah, I'm sticking around. There's still over 30 people here. So I'll stick around till anybody, if you have questions or anything, I'll stay till everyone leaves. I'm in lockdown too. I'm not going anywhere. Yeah. But thank you again all for listening and finding benefit in this. This isn't for everybody, right? I was on an airplane once and I had the privilege to sit next to this 55-year-old Indian gentleman. He had 2 children who were in college. He was a successful internet or technology pioneer, founder or something. And we got into talking and he said, I'm 55 years old or something, and I don't know who I am. My kids are gone, my company's successful, that's all done, but now I have to revisit the hardest question is who I am. What am I going to do going forward? And I feel it's a question that everybody needs to answer. Some people have the luxury to answer it earlier and later. Some people struggle with it, but I think it's something that that everyone needs to address at some point. That's why here, I have it on this one, right? In the handout, I have 3 dots, and there's a reason why it's body, mind, spirit. We tend to either focus on the body, we focus on the mind, or the spirit, or it's never balanced. We just focus on one or maybe 2. And oftentimes what's left out is the spirit, right? And it seems kind of like hokey and it seems a little crazy. What is that? I can't buy it, I can't pay for it, I can't study for it, so therefore it's not real. But it is real, and you all know it's real because you feel it. And it's a question of whether you have to deal with it now or later as you get older. Thank you again for your kind words. If you're wrestling with any of these types of challenges and some of the stuff we talked about, I'm not a life coach or anything like that, but I've gone through it and be more than willing to help you or to give you some insights. It's something that I've tried to solve for 20 some years. I would challenge you all also to start journaling if you're not journaling, because what that does, it's going to give you a picture of who you really are, right? There's this term in psychology called the recency effect, and we identify a lot more with recent events. We remember, we give them greater weight than events from the past. So oftentimes people beat themselves up, say they're a failure, say that they're no good, and they only look at a small window of time, when in reality your life is 20, 30, 40, however many years. That's who you are. But unless you journal, you forget that. You can't go back in time and remember what you were thinking. So there's 2 ways you can journal. One is you can write it, or number 2, like in Star Trek, do a video log. Good, that's it. Bye-bye, everyone. I think that's it. I'll just stick around to the last person's out, and then I'll head out. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you for coming. Stay safe. Hasta luego. Nice to meet. Ciao. 山本さん、おやすみなさい。失礼いたしまして。Thank you, Alessandra. Ciao. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Bye-bye.